On February 11, 2015, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee held a hearing on the EPA's Clean Power Plan. This is a 5-minute recap. The person in charge of the rule, Jana McCabe, who's the acting administrator for the EPA Office of Air, came in to explain and defend the rule.
Climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time. That's why President Obama laid out a climate action plan and why this summer the EPA will be taking flexible, common-sense steps to cut carbon pollution from the power sector. Starting in January 2014, EPA has issued 3 proposals to address CO2 emissions from power plants. These rules will set standards for CO2 emissions from new, existing, and modified and reconstructed fossil fuel-fired power plants. As we announced in January, the EPA intends to finalize these 3 rules by mid-summer 2015. EPA's stakeholder outreach and public engagement in preparation for these rulemakings has been unprecedented and has resulted in an unprecedented amount of public input.
Most Democratic senators spent their time defending the rule.
Whether we like it or not, our country has the dubious distinction of having been a leader in creating the problem. But now, thanks to the hard work of this administration, we are on track to solving this problem.
If people can't breathe, they can't work or go to school. And we know that this particular proposal will avoid up to 3,700 cases of bronchitis in children.
I'm keenly aware of what the economic damage could be if we get this wrong in West Virginia and Wyoming, in Arkansas and other states. But I cannot have a situation in which the other side refuses to acknowledge the reality of what is happening in Rhode Island.
Republicans, for the most part, stayed away from a scientific debate here, though that appears to be in the works.
We'll hear over and over again what science says and all that. We're going to have a hearing. We're going to have scientists at a hearing.
Some of the very learned and educated contrarians on the issue of climate change will turn out to be vindicated in the end.
Perhaps the biggest objection on the day from Republicans is that the EPA does not have authority to make this rule.
We're talking about doing through regulations what we have not been able to do through legislation. In other words, those of us who are accountable to the people, I'm talking about members of the House and members of the Senate, we have resoundingly rejected the very thing we're talking about today on CO2 on 5 different occasions in the last 13 years. All right, then what authority, what enforcement authority do you have to do that? You can't take away their highway funds. What are you planning to do to coerce them to do something that is unconstitutional that they don't want to do?
Well, First Senator, I would respectfully disagree that the program is unconstitutional.
Well, and actually 32 states did submit legal objections to the rule in the form of comments, including my home state of Wyoming. And when a majority of states object to a rule, then I think you've done something wrong.
Do you think that this regulation dramatically expands your authority?
I do not.
You don't?
I don't.
The other big problem for critics is that this plan will cut U.S. emissions while worldwide emissions will keep going up.
How will the Clean Power Plan impact global CO2 emissions when China is producing more CO2 in 1 month than the Clean Power Plan could potentially reduce in 1 year, even when if it's implemented?
Republicans are also bothered by the fact that this rule seems to closely follow recommendations from an environmentalist group.
One document in particular suggests that these rules were crafted to please the NRDC, with Gina McCarthy going so far as to tell the NRDC, climate advisor David Doniger, quote, "This success is yours as much as mine." But perhaps the biggest challenge is going to be that every state has its own target set by the EPA, and every state feels like they're unique and that their target is not fair.
One such issue I hope to address is inequities in the state targets. I've heard from stakeholders that the proposal requires more of states that have already made substantial carbon reductions.
As you know, Nebraska is the only state in the nation with a wholly publicly owned utility power sector. The compliance cost will be directly borne by Nebraska residents.
South Dakota's native electricity production was approximately 74% renewable energy and 26% from fossil fuels.
We have just under 2 million hardworking Americans who receive 95% of our electricity from coal power generation.